can you maybe, so you also mentioned how your book is modular. Do you want to just speak a little bit about the overall structure, and then maybe we'll dive into some of the particulars?
Sure. I focus on it's 6 parts in general. The first part is after the intro is an explanation of just what is money, right? So kind of just going into the deeper theories of money. The second part is basically banking, which is mainly about either provision of credit or in the early days, a lot of it was just moving money more efficiently. Basically, how to move transactions and physically move around money easier than bullion. The third part is the structure of the global financial system, kind of a system engineering analysis of how does this whole thing works. Part 4 is kind of diving into some of the effects of how an inflationary environment affects us all, kind of the Cantillon effect and that kind of way of looking at things, kind of just nuances that we might not think of in terms of how this affects us. Part 5 is an investigation on digital assets. So things like Bitcoin, stablecoins, central bank digital currencies, how Bitcoin works, why it's relevant. It's not just, monkey JPEGs. That's kind of what people kind of equate those two things together. Whereas it's no, there's financial innovation here, monetary innovation here. And then 6th part is the blend of human rights and financial technology, basically saying that how certain technologies can contract human rights and other ones can expand them. You give people more tools with which to direct their own lives in a freer way. And it goes into, kind of the practical realities of surveillance, the theory of surveillance that happens, especially financially, but just broadly. It goes into some of the precedents around the legality of sharing information. And then it talks about basically there's 2 paths forward. Either we continue the path of ever more centralization, or some of these technologies actually open the door for the first time where you can have financial efficiency that's not based on one giant central ledger that someone controls. And that this is basically a way to fracture some of those centralized forces and to have that different futures. It's almost like a call to action to say, well, there's two ways. And so, which way are we going to go?
Great. So if we can, the first part I saw that you were saying like the essence of money is that it's a ledger. So I obviously understand the sense in which, Bitcoin, that's pretty clear what you mean. And then even government issued fiat currency, certainly if you interact that with the banking system, I understand that. But somebody might hesitate on like commodity money historically, like people are going and literally panning for gold and then stamping them into coins. I think I've even made the argument. I think I saw Elon Musk one time say money is a ledger, and I objected at the commodity part and saying, well, no, I get a coin. There's no history of who owned that thing in the past. It's just, it is what it is. So can you explain, what do you mean? In what sense is even commodity money, can you view it as a ledger?
Sure. The way that I view commodity as a ledger is basically if you picture a region in God mode where you kind of see all the variables, there's a certain amount of gold in that region in various forms. And there's a certain method with which new gold can be added to it, basically mining. And people exchange gold physically. So by physical possession, they will move gold around. And it's basically a big ledger that people are relying on the natural laws of how the world works to govern, what is the supply growth rate of this ledger, who owns the units. And you can do that exercise with anything. Like if you have hunter-gatherers and there's a certain amount of shell beads in the region, and of course, new ones can be added over time, some can be destroyed. No one person knows, there's 1,256 shell beads in this region, but they know roughly the parameters of what a shell bead is, how hard they are to make, whether or not they're desirable, and they update them physically. And just kind of stepping back for a second, in the book, I try to sort of bridge the gap between 2 divergent theories of money. So there's the commodity theory of money, there's the credit theory of money. And basically, I kind of just say they're both ledgers. And I think the first one I've ever heard articulate this was Ventus Casares from Argentina. He had a number of videos about it. It wasn't really in literature. It's just his verbal descriptions of how things work. And I think that's a good way of thinking of it, is that whether we're relying on a central bank, whether we're relying on gold, whether we're relying on Bitcoin, at the end of the day, we're kind of surveilling the ledgers we have available to us and picking one, or being sometimes forced to use one, but ideally we're picking one as an individual, as a community that makes sense. and that you're
Mhm.
trusting, you're always trusting something there. It's basically the question, the book that kind of reoccurs is who controls the ledger? And when you think about ways, what money is, basically money is that which helps us avoid barter. And there's really two ways to do it, which is where the two divergent theories of money come from. One is you can, if we're going to transact and we're in a hunter-gatherer environment, for example, and we don't know each other, there's really two ways to do it. Actually, whether or not we know each other or not. So one is if we can do barter if you have a surplus of something that I have a deficiency in, and I have a surplus that you have a deficiency in. Double coincidence of wants, well known in economic circles. And the two ways to solve that are either time. So one way is that if you need something, I don't need anything from you, I can just give it to you, and now I've kind of banked credit, right? That basically, it's like you owe me one now,
Mhm.
either informally, formally, depending on how we're structuring things, or we basically money emerges as a natural unit, a savings unit, a medium of exchange, where it's like a super unit that can be on one side of every transaction. So it just smooths transactions that way. And of course, there are certain contexts where we might use one or the other with a family members, friends, local community, or some sort of kind of legalistic area. Credit can make sense. Whereas if you don't know people, or if you want to have money that does not rely on anyone else's liability, that's where spot settlement, physical settlement makes sense. Or bringing your wealth from one community to another community. It's like, kind of commodity money is like open source money in the sense that, you can show up with a stranger and it's valuable to them. Whereas your credit unit from your little community might not be valuable or recognized in another community. And so that's kind of how I approach that, is that at the end of the day, both credit and even physical money are us relying on kind of these divisible unit-based amounts. And they're either conceptually like written down ledgers, or they are literally us physically moving around and storing and transacting with a certain number of kind of physical units in an area.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And you mentioned something, and I know this is in the literature, but the way you brought it out, it just hadn't fully clicked with me. So in the Austrian tradition, like, going back to Karl Menger, and I know you cited all this stuff, so you're familiar with what I'm talking about, Lynn. Just I'm saying this for the listeners. The explanation of the origin of money, and they say, oh, it wasn't that there was some wise king or this group of elders that just invented money. For one thing, we have no historical record. Like, you would think, wow, that's a monumental achievement. Shouldn't we be celebrating the person who, but also, if you were originally a barter society and someone said, hey, let's use these shells that nobody cares about and have this be on one half of every transaction, it would sound nutty. Like that, that's, oh, don't worry, sell your horses for these shells. But when you need something, somebody else will take these shells that they don't really care about either. Like that would just sound crazy. But yet, we understand the sense in which money certainly is very advantageous socially. And so Menger had his theory, but it was more, as you said, Lynn, solving the problem of the double coincidence of wants, that there's limitations on direct barter transactions, that the tailor is able to mend your shoes, and if you're the farmer with extra eggs, but what if the tailor doesn't want more eggs that day, but he needs his shoes repaired, or sorry, his pants hemmed? That's what the tailor would do. I'm getting the cobbler and the tailor mixed up. And so, then you can't trade. But if there's then a third person, and then it's sort of like if the goods could all move in a circle around those three people, then they'd all be better off, and money helps facilitate that. That's the normal Austrian way of viewing it. But you introduce the time element to say, what if somebody had a real good hunt today and he's got extra meat, and so like just in terms of custom or whatever, that might just be standard in the tribe, that, oh yeah, so he's going to share, knowing that down the road, maybe if he goes out and comes back empty-handed, somebody else who got lucky and had a good kill shares in turn. And so money could help just systematize that and make it more, easier to keep track of. So it's not, anyway, it just introducing the time element of that. Yeah, like one-off trades might not be, in terms of the spot transaction, that would be the end of the story. But it in a sense allows, for, what I guess is technically a credit transaction, but through the vehicle of the money of the community. So anyway, that was an interesting element you had brought into it.
Hey, everybody, this is Bob Murphy. Thanks for listening to this clip from the Infi podcast. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, please consider subscribing and share this video with others. We've got new episodes dropping every Friday with more insightful discussions. Stay tuned.